Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Kamel Greene, founder and CEO of Poly Platform, and we're back here again. We're actually working with Laura Tobler, and she's awesome to work with. This is the podcast, Tools of Engagement, and I really just want to sit down and get a better understanding and really talk to you all about like what goes on within local governments, more specifically Parks and Rec. She's the Parks and Recreation Coordinator for Sandy City, doing awesome things. And really the big thing about this is we want to have a conversation to learn more, but really pop the hood and learn more about Laura. What made you want to get into this space? Why are you doing what you're doing? And so I want to introduce you all to Laura Tobler, and just say, hey, Laura, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Why are you working within local government, and what got you here?
Yeah, so I was down at UVU as a student, and I actually started my degree in emergency medicine. And that whole time that I was like studying to be an EMT and everything, I was working at rec centers and doing events for cities. And I finally realized, like, what am I doing? So I changed my major into recreation, with the goal of planning events and sports for communities. It took me a while to get here. I went private for a long time, and was doing marketing and events and different things. And now I'm here with Sandy City, planning rec sports and events for this community. And I do it because the fulfillment on kids' faces when like they achieve something and when they learn is what makes it worth it.
Awesome. That's super good. And just to kind of preface for you all, this is like, we don't send out the questions as you all know beforehand. And we were just talking before and Laura said, yeah, my last name is Tobler. And then I turned around and was like Tobler. So it's definitely Laura Tobler. But Laura, I think that's awesome. I know a lot of times that's what you hear, right? You hear, when I can see their smile on their faces and stuff like that. But I want to go deeper a little bit. Like, where are you from? And then kind of like, what is the why, and like outside of the small, but like what keeps you going, because it's not easy. So like, okay, first, where are you from? And then the next question is kind of like, what keeps you going besides just the small on their faces?
Yeah, so I'm actually from Sandy City, Utah. I grew up here. So it was like a full circle moment kind of for me because I played Sandy City rec soccer as a kid.
Nice.
Like I was in Sandy City Junior Jazz. So to be on the other side of like planning that for kids, it was like full circle for me. But honestly, the motivation is like for me is how can I make each season better? Like, okay, this one went well, and how can I make it better? Like, yeah, like the fulfillment for them is great, but like, how can I make it a better experience for the parents? How can I make it a better experience for my referees? Like, just trying to improve and make it a good culture, a good place to work, a good place to be involved in sports and go to events and just have like build our community up and like make it feel like it's a safe space and that, like there's a place for everybody here.
I like that. And I think building community is hugely important. Just for people who don't know, like, how does a Parks and Recreation, like sometimes Parks and Recreation is like a part of the county, sometimes part of the city. Can you help us better understand kind of the construct within Sandy City?
Yeah, so every city does do it differently. And then even within Sandy City, there is a county facility. So Sandy City doesn't have like a rec center, but if you know Dimpledale Recreation Center, that's like technically a county run facility. So it's part of Salt Lake County Recreation, and like we have nothing to do with it. So like people will call us and be like, hey, I had a question about this sport, and I'm like, oh, that's not us, that's Dimpledale. Like, so that can be confusing sometimes, but we are definitely like separate in that way. So Sandy City, we have a really big Parks and Rec department. Sandy is like the sixth biggest city in the state right now. And we have like a population of like 100,000 people. So for us, we have a ton of parks, a big Parks and Rec department. We have 3 recreation coordinators here, and then a rec manager, and then a manager above that, and then the Parks and Rec director. So we have a lot of hands in Parks and Rec here in Sandy.
How are you able to, so again, this is the Tools of Engagement podcast, and you mentioned how big it is. So I've spoke with multiple people, who work within the Parks and Rec capacity for different cities and towns. It's definitely not as big as you all. What would you say are the tools of engagement? Like, how are you all able to manage that?
So that's hard. And honestly, when I've only started here in February of 2021, I had to check my calendar to
Really?
make sure I was right. Yeah.
Wow.
So I haven't even quite been here 2 years. And because I came from that marketing background, like my job before this, I was doing marketing. So that kind of prepared me a little bit more for, okay, like we should have an e-newsletter every month, like going out of like what's going on, what we have available. Because like when I've started like 4 new programs, and with those new programs, like people need to know about them. How are we going to get this out? So started that like e-newsletter and like sending emails, like putting signs out and like Instagram. And that's kind of where it like started for me. And then when we saw the app at that conference, it was like, this is amazing. This would be a great tool to help us send like rain out cancellations, because before that conference, they would call in a phone number and like listen and sit there and be like, okay, for this sport, hit this, for this, hit this. And it was like, okay, it like took forever. And then it was like, I had to call in personally and like leave a voice recording.
Yeah.
And the big thing that spurred it for me was like, I had strep throat one day and I couldn't talk.
Yeah.
And I was like, I was like the only one available to do it. And I was like, I can't even do it. So
Right.
for me, it was like, we need to simplify this process right now. Like it is bad.
Yeah.
So having the Poly app help us like send notifications, and we got rid of our e-newsletter because of the Poly app as well. And having that timeline and those different events that you can add really made a difference for us too.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the shout out. That way, and it wasn't scripted, but I appreciate the shout out. But no, I think that means a lot. And I think that's our goal, is to continue to optimize and try to help you all kind of improve that process. Kind of getting more, shifting topics and getting more into, the listeners, the viewers. There's going to be people who obviously work within, government, who's listening and watching this, but also residents. And so, you interface with residents on a daily basis. If you were able to communicate or just say, hey, it'll be nice if residents knew more about X, what would that look like? What would that sound like?
Honestly, it would be nice if residents knew all that we do offer. I think a lot of the times, because we have run junior jazz and soccer and adult softball, like we've run those programs for so long that like everybody knows about them and they know that they're available. But this last year, I started a rock climbing program and outdoor adventure club and girls volleyball. And so there's all these things going on that we're trying to make people aware of like, no, like keep sticking with us, because we're running more than just those like basic 4 sports that everybody's used to.
Right.
Like there's more happening, and we're building and we're making more events, and like there's a lot happening in Sandy right now. We're trying to bring that back.
Yeah, no, you all are doing a lot of cool stuff too. And then, Halloween was just this past weekend. And it seemed like you all were doing a lot of stuff too. I feel like that's the big thing, is that like cities are doing a lot, but residents don't know. And that's kind of like, that's even like the big thing. What we're trying to do is help amplify that. But there's so many resources and things like there, out there for cities as well, which kind of goes into my next question, which is kind of, what is, I wouldn't say what what was your like most difficult experience so far? You've said you've been there for, let me not say most, but what is an experience that you can articulate that you've learned from, and just as someone working within the local government capacity? And again, I'm going to give you some time to think about that too, because again, to our viewers and listeners, this is straight off the cuff as well. But what are, we want to kind of hear the true realities behind, people who work within the municipal realm. And so what is a difficult experience that you could note, and how you were able to get past that?
It's funny because when I tell people what I do, it's always kind of followed up with the joke. I always ask, like, have you watched the show Parks and Rec? Because that show is not as fictional as people think it is. Like, there's sadly some like real things that happen working in government. Like, we always laugh over here at the office, like, no, this is real life. Like, this actually happens.
Interesting.
So honestly, the hardest part is when I obviously want to be like nice about this too, but it's hard dealing with parents when they're upset with something with their kid.
Yeah.
If usually it's that they didn't get on the team that they wanted to be on.
There you go. You're getting
And
into the real stuff right there. I could only imagine when I was playing and my dad would have been like, why is he not on this team? You know?
yeah, like it's hard, and I understand their point of view. I understand that they're passionate and they want their kid to get this and get this, but at the same time, like I'm just looking at a screen, I can't read minds, like I'm just going off what I have.
Right.
And I don't know that he's in your carpool group. So it's just like that is the hardest part. And and then usually that call comes a little bit too late after teams have been made, coaches have been notified, and then the parents calling me and it's like, well, I can't move that kid off the team for so it just kind of gets a little bit messy. So it stinks,
Yeah.
but working with parents can be kind of difficult.
Yeah, and I can only imagine that behavioralism aspect to it, and that's something where you can always try to make to improve upon, but it's always going to be there for sure.
Yeah.
So I guess it's definitely going to resonate with a lot of our viewers and listeners for sure, and that's good because that seems so obvious, yet I would not have thought about that because like we don't necessarily think about it too much, and you all are doing a lot, and a lot for the community as well, and so I'll definitely commend you on that. And if I was to, as I start to conclude things out, if you were to say, okay, these are the tools of engagement to strengthen the community based off your experience, if you were to say that in 3 words, what would that sound like?
Uh, um,
And I
that's
told you
hard.
all this was I told you all this was off the cuff as well.
I know you're gonna have to say that. You're gonna have to say the question one more time for me.
So as far as tools of engagement from other listeners, right? There's going to be listeners across Washington State, California, now in the DMV area that are in the similar capacity, working within Parks and Rec, government, et cetera. If you were to say, hey, through my experience, these words, rather it's, sense of access, opportunity, community, being able to amplify the voice, et cetera. If you were to say, these are 3 things that I'm doing and it's helping me strengthen our community for Sandy City, how would you articulate that as a knowledge transfer for other viewers and listeners?
Yeah, so internet, like social media, if you have e-newsletters and if you have the budget for it, like get that. And there's some cheap options out there. Obviously the app has been huge for us. We've had a lot of downloads lately, and it's been a really great tool for us for so many reasons for notifying. And honestly, just getting out there and being a part of the community that you're working in, connecting with the people, the residents in that city, like showing your face and talking to people, being part of like even like Facebook groups. Like I joined a bunch of Facebook groups just because I know that's where my residents are at.
Yeah.
So just trying to be a part of that community and like engaging with residents and showing them that like you're one of them.
No, for sure. I think that's hugely important. And so I always do this as we close things out. I've been asking a lot of questions. If you had a question for me, you can say, Kamel, what's this? What would your question for me be?
Why go into this?
No, I think that's a good question. Why did I go into this? You see, as I said, it's off the cuff. So I'm originally from a small town in the Bay Area. And my mom, she was always involved in local government. She had a passion for community. You talked about sports. My dad was like the coach of the community. And so, I always talk about the story where I can distinctly remember my mom passing out flyers, and I was passing out flyers with her. Can you vote for my mom? Can you vote for my mom? And I was always having that sense of community, but at an early age, I had a passion for government. But I was able to see, and I remember, my mother ingraining to me the importance behind opportunity and access. That was always important to me. And I was able to see across the different towns, just, the difference between the opportunity and access they had just because of them knowing what they knew. And then I seen kind of within my community, being, the information was more marginalized to a certain extent. And so in that community, you don't know what you don't know. And so at an early age, not only did I have a passion for government and obviously growing up in the Silicon Valley, I had a passion for technology. I truly had a passion for strengthening community, but also facilitating access, opportunity, and information to, people, especially, even more underprivileged groups. And so that was a passion for mine. And so as I kind of, went to BYU, played football and did all that, I ended up getting my master's in public administration where we focused on government. And while working for government, I kind of seen like, hey, there's a huge disconnect when it comes to, if the vital purpose is to be representatives of the community, how can we facilitate that? And so I believe that being able to modernize, digitize a city to a certain extent, you therefore can amplify your voice and you're not necessarily competing with the digital saturation out there. And you can make it so that government is in the palm of people's hands. And that is kind of the vision behind Polyplatform. And that's kind of like why I'm doing it. I want it to be more, inclusive, demographically representative, and increase access to residents. And so that's kind of the vision behind what I'm doing.
You nailed it for us. So
awesome. Well, I appreciate it, Laura. It's been awesome speaking with you. Again, this is the Polyplatform Tools of Engagement podcast. And I would say thank you so much for sharing your insights with the community.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
Awesome.